Hello everyone, my name is Elijah Kay. Thanks for joining me. Today I'll be interviewing Dr. Rob Stegmann. Rob Stegmann has a PhD in masculine gender studies, and he was also a New Testament professor. What makes Rob Stegmann's work so interesting is that he uses what he calls a post-colonial optic, and more specifically a South African, which is where he lives, a South African post-colonial optic to view all of Scripture, and it's the lens through which he also does his masculine gender studies. So we'll be having some interesting discussions. We'll be talking about what is colonialism, and then what is post-colonialism, and then we'll talk about Rob's context, which is South Africa, and we'll talk about the history there a little bit, and give you some definitions or some quick intro discussions on apartheid. And then finally, we'll finish it up with a little bit on the US. So I hope you find this interesting. I sure do. And I hope you can stick with us, and hopefully we'll get these videos out shortly. Thank you so much. Here's Rob. So Rob, can you tell us more about what colonialism is?
Sure. So colonialism essentially refers to any form of domination, usually with violence. So the use of violence in order to dominate either politically or economically. So it's a way of taking control of a territory by a foreign nation coming in and exerting force and using violence in order to, I suppose, in some ways, to construct a new society, if you want to kind of think along those lines. So essentially, it's effectively the idea of violent domination that's either exerted politically and or economically. And I think the point with colonialism always is that even if it first and foremost is a political form of domination, inevitably it also includes an economic sort of underlying sort of story. And I think that's fairly critical for understanding why it is that a nation would come into another territory, take control of that territory. There's something economically important that needs to that nation, that colonizing nation, actually wants to take control of. And I think that becomes a fairly critical aspect of colonialism. So that, very broadly speaking, is a basic definition of colonialism.
Right. So a government from, let's say, Europe, because they are
would be a good one.
they're the common perpetrators of such things, right?
Yeah.
Can come into a country for resources, for okay, yeah. So
either to enlarge their own colony, that they're exerting their political supremacy, or and it's not all, but it's usually and there's a natural resource, or there's a strategic importance to taking over a territory or a land or another country. So the invasion of a country by another country is done with political strategy in mind. It has an economic edge to it as well, and it's about enlarging the dominance of that particular country. So I think that's quite important to kind of note.
Yeah, sure. And I guess it also depends. It differs depending on the country that's doing it and upon the time, right? There are different forms of colonialism. I guess we would probably kind of be results of colonialism, right? I'm a white European male who's living in what is now the United States, right? And I'm guessing you would consider yourself the same way, right? A white European male who's living in as a result of colonialism.
Exactly.
Colonialization.
Yeah, totally.
But colonialization doesn't always look like, people moving into an area, right? Fit with physical bodies, or does it always look like physical bodies being placed in a country?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does usually take on that as an initial form. How does one? I mean, if you look at the history of colonialism and coloniality, it's usually the movement of one nation into another area. And so it's the presence, I think it's important to note this, it's the presence of that other nation the colonizer,
Hmm.
that enables the process of colonization. So how do you actually get people to think and behave and to do what you want them to do without actually being present in that space? And that presence is a way of re-socializing the indigenous population, so that it is brought under the control of the colony.
Hmm.
So so if we think in those terms, then I think it's helpful for us to kind of get a handle on the importance of physical presence as a way of conveying the culture of the colonizer in the context of the colonized. The point of colonization is you want that space to look like your homeland, basically.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and South Africa and the States also has history of being colonized. So Europeans go to the States, discover the land,
Right.
and as if it wasn't there was no one there before they arrived. But that's a process of colonization, and so some of the New England. Well, why is it called New England, right?
Right. Right.
So
They're trying to make
it's a way.
another England. Yeah.
Yeah, so it becomes an outpost of the colony that you're establishing in another space, and so your physical presence becomes a fairly important part of that, and along with it, the culture that you bring and the norms and the worldview.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's interesting, isn't it? That I mean, I guess some of these colonies and uh, colonized peoples, they still have kind of second-rate status, right? I mean,
Sure.
did Europeans in South Africa have like a second-rate status in from wherever they came from, or were they considered equal?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to the rhetoric, right? It comes down to what you're trying to achieve. So, a country sends its ambassadors to colonize another land. The story you've got to tell there is that this is an opportunity, right? This is the new world. This is a pioneering moment for our colony, for our country, for our nation, and so I think for the most part, colonial stories are about trying to capture the imagination of what could be new possibilities, and so you send off your people to take occupation of these wild, untamed nations and lands. So I think that there may be a sort of a sense of adventure with that, but I think at the same time, I think the struggles of setting up a colony, maybe there's a little bit of, it may be better to have stayed at home than to be the ones trying to set up the colony.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I mean, I guess it depends. There's different classes of people at each colony, maybe. Because I remember reading the book White Trash, some of it. So it's a wonderful name. But yeah, I think it said that England sent a lot of its riffraff
Sure.
not to have. I mean, there's better terms for it, but the people in the streets to go work the colonies. We have too many people. We're running out of room. Let's get rid of the lower class.
Let's get rid of some.
Yeah, and send them away. To go work in Jamestown or whatever.
Exactly. I think each attempt at colonization by whichever dominant culture or dominant nation at any particular moment in history had similar strategies, but may have approached the process of colonization quite differently. So, I mean, if you look at Alexander the Great, in some ways, a good example of colonialism and imperialism, this idea of trying to enlarge the empire of the Greeks. And what does he do? He sends his philosophers, and this is a way of transmitting the culture. And so the point is you want to establish a sense of the presence of the colonizing culture in that space, and he understood that you had to do that through your philosophers or your teachers. so that they could teach the culture of the Greeks.